The billionaire's baby wouldn't stop crying on the bed until a poor black maid did the unimaginable. The penthouse suite overlooked Manhattan's glittering skyline, but inside chaos reigned. Little Sophia Montgomery, 18 months old and heir to a pharmaceutical empire, had been screaming for 3 hours straight. "Please, Miss Sophia, please stop crying," begged Mrs. Henderson, the 6th nanny this month. She'd already tried bottles, toys, songs, and everything in her expensive childcare training manual. Nothing worked. Victoria Montgomery paced outside the nursery, her Cartier heels clicking against Italian marble. Her husband James was in Tokyo closing a billion-dollar deal. She had a charity gala in 2 hours and still needed hair and makeup. "Mrs. Henderson, I don't pay you $12,000 a month to listen to my daughter scream." "I'm sorry, ma'am. I've tried everything. Maybe she's ill. The pediatrician was here this morning. She's perfectly healthy." Victoria's phone buzzed with another reminder. "I have to get ready." "Figure it out." As Victoria disappeared into her dressing room, Mrs. Henderson felt tears of frustration. This job was supposed to be her big break, but she was failing miserably. She didn't notice the quiet figure watching from the hallway. Grace Okonkwo had been cleaning the Montgomery penthouse for 3 months. At 42, she worked 3 jobs to support her daughter's nursing, school tuition back in Nigeria. She kept her head down, did her work, and stayed invisible. Exactly how the wealthy liked their help. But watching that baby cry broke something in her heart. "Excuse me," Grace said softly. Mrs. Henderson spun around, startled. "You shouldn't be here. This is the family wing." "I know, ma'am. I'm sorry, but may I try? With the baby?" Mrs. Henderson laughed bitterly. You're a cleaning woman." "I have a degree in early childhood development from Columbia University." "Yes, ma'am. But I raised 4 younger siblings after my mother died, and I have a daughter of my own." Something in Grace's steady, confident voice made Mrs. Henderson hesitate. She was desperate. What could it hurt? "Fine, 2 minutes. Then I'm calling Mrs. Montgomery." Grace entered the nursery, where Sophia stood in her designer crib, red-faced and sobbing. The room was perfect, temperature-controlled, filled with imported toys, decorated by a famous children's designer. Everything except what the baby actually needed. Grace didn't reach for Sophia immediately. Instead, she began humming an old Igbo lullaby her mother used to sing. She moved slowly around the room, straightening items, her movements calm and rhythmic. Sophia's screaming reduced to hiccuping sobs. Her eyes, puffy from crying, followed this new person. Then Grace did something unexpected. She lifted the corner of the mattress. Mrs. Henderson gasped. "What are you doing?" "That's a $3,000 organic mattress." Beneath it, Grace pulled out a worn, stuffed elephant, threadbare, faded, clearly loved. It looked completely out of place among Sophia's pristine nursery. "Where did that come from?" Mrs. Henderson whispered. Grace didn't answer. She simply held the elephant out to Sophia, who immediately stopped crying. The baby's face transformed, reaching desperately for the toy. The moment it touched her hands, she pulled it close, buried her face in its worn fabric, and released a long, shuddering sigh. Silence fell over the room. "I found it last week," Grace explained quietly. "When I was cleaning under the crib, it had fallen behind the furniture. I washed it and put it under the mattress, thinking maybe the family would want to throw it away. It doesn't match the nursery's design." Mrs. Henderson stared in disbelief. "But how did you know?" "When I came to clean this morning, Mrs. Montgomery was talking on the phone. She said Sophia started crying exactly 3 weeks ago, the same day the interior designer redecorated this room. I remembered finding the elephant 1 week ago. I thought maybe..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Sophia was already drowsy, her breathing evening out. The elephant clutched tightly in her small fists. "This is impossible," Mrs. Henderson breathed. All that crying, all that distress. Over a toy? Why didn't her parents know? Grace said nothing. She knew why. She cleaned this penthouse every day. She saw the parents' schedules, their priorities, their lives. She saw everything they were too busy to see. "Don't tell Mrs. Montgomery I touched the baby," Grace said quietly. "I shouldn't have. I'll go back to cleaning now." "Wait," Mrs. Henderson began, but Grace had already slipped out. Victoria emerged from her dressing room an hour later, immaculate in a Valentino gown. She paused, surprised by the silence. Mrs. Henderson? Why isn't Sophia crying? She's asleep, ma'am. Already? How? Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then made a decision. I found what was upsetting her. She wanted her elephant toy. It had been removed during the redecoration. Victoria frowned. That old thing? My mother-in-law gave it to Sophia when she was born. It was hideous. I had it thrown out. Perhaps not thrown out, ma'am. It was under the crib. We'll throw it out now. It doesn't match the aesthetic. Mrs. Montgomery? With respect, Sophia hasn't slept more than an hour at a time in 3 weeks. The moment she got that elephant back, she fell asleep immediately. As a nanny, I must advise. I don't pay you to advise me on aesthetics. Mrs. Henderson, I pay you to keep my daughter quiet and happy. If that ugly elephant accomplishes that, then she can keep it. But only in her crib, not in any photographs. After Victoria left for her gala, Mrs. Henderson went looking for Grace. She found her cleaning the library. You saved my job tonight, Mrs. Henderson said simply. Thank you. Grace nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. It was just a toy, ma'am. No, it wasn't just a toy, it was paying attention, actually seeing that baby, not just managing her. Mrs. Henderson paused. You have children? A daughter, 23, studying to be a nurse in Lagos. You must miss her. Every day. But I work so she doesn't have to struggle like I did. Mrs. Henderson looked at this woman who cleaned floors for minimum wage, who'd solved in minutes what she couldn't solve in hours, who'd observed more in 3 months than the parents had in 3 weeks. Grace, may I ask you something? Why do you work here? You're clearly capable of more than cleaning. Grace smiled sadly. In my country, I was a teacher, but my credentials aren't recognized here, and my daughter's tuition doesn't pay itself. So I clean. It's honest work. Have you thought about taking childcare certification courses? With your skills, Mrs. Henderson, I'm 42 years old. I work 17 hours a day across 3 jobs. I send every extra dollar to my daughter. I don't have time or money for certification courses. Before Mrs. Henderson could respond, Victoria's assistant appeared. Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Montgomery would like you to prepare Sophia's schedule for tomorrow. She has a photo shoot at 9. The moment passed. Grace returned to her work, and life in the penthouse continued as before. But Mrs. Henderson couldn't forget what had happened. Over the following weeks, she began to notice what Grace noticed. The way Sophia's face lit up when Grace hummed while cleaning. How the baby stopped fussing during Grace's shifts. How Grace always knew when Sophia needed a window opened because the room was too warm, or when she needed an extra blanket. Then 6 weeks later, everything changed. Victoria and James returned from a weekend in the Hamptons to find Sophia burning with fever. The pediatrician diagnosed a severe infection, requiring immediate hospitalization. At Mount Sinai, doctors stabilized Sophia, but she remained in the ICU, hooked to monitors. Tiny and fragile in the hospital bed, she wouldn't stop crying, even on medication. James Montgomery, a man who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals, stood helpless beside his daughter's bed. Victoria sat frozen, perfectly styled even in crisis, but her hands shook. She's going to be fine, the doctor assured them. But she needs rest. The crying is preventing proper sleep, which slows healing. They tried everything. Different medications, different nurses, specialists. Nothing worked. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Henderson arrived for a visit. She brought Sophia's elephant. Oh God, not that ratty thing, Victoria said. This is a hospital. Mrs. Montgomery, it comforts her, please. They placed it beside Sophia. She clutched it, but the crying continued. Mrs. Henderson took a chance. There's someone else who might help. The woman who figured out about the elephant. Who? James demanded. Get them here. I don't care what it costs. She's your cleaning woman, sir. Grace Okonkwo, Victoria nearly laughed. You want me to bring a maid to my daughter's ICU room? I want to bring someone who actually sees your daughter. Mrs. Henderson said quietly. Someone who pays attention. Someone who cares. The bluntness shocked Victoria into silence. James, however, nodded. Call her. Grace arrived still in her cleaning uniform, having left her second job early. She looked terrified. Completely out of place in this gleaming hospital among Manhattan's elite. But when she approached Sophia's bed and began to hum that same Igbo lullaby, something magical happened. Sophia's crying stuttered, stopped. Her eyes found Grace's face. Grace continued humming, her work-worn hand gently patting Sophia's small one. She sang softly in Igbo, then in English, songs about sunshine and birds and home. Within 10 minutes, Sophia was asleep. Truly deeply asleep. The monitors showed her heart rate settling, her breathing evening. The nurse watched in amazement. "How did you do that?" James whispered. Grace looked uncomfortable. She needed someone to be present with her, sir. Not trying to fix her or manage her, just to be with her. Victoria had tears streaming down her perfect makeup. "I don't even know what my daughter needs. I'm her mother, and I don't know." "You've been busy, ma'am," Grace said gently. "Sometimes we all need help seeing what's right in front of us." For the next 3 days until Sophia was released, Grace came to the hospital during her break times. She never stayed long, just long enough to sing Sophia to sleep. To be present in that calm, attentive way. James and Victoria watched and, perhaps for the first time, really saw their daughter. They saw what they'd been too busy to notice. They saw what Grace, the invisible cleaning woman, had observed all along. On the day of Sophia's discharge, James called Grace to his study. "Ms. Okonkwo, I want to offer you a position. Full-time nanny for Sophia. I'll pay for whatever certifications you need, and the salary will be 3 times what you make now across all your jobs. Plus health insurance and education assistance for your daughter." Grace stood silently, tears running down her face. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Victoria added softly. She stood beside her husband, holding Sophia, who was already reaching for Grace. "You saved our daughter twice. Once from a lack of sleep and once from a lack of love. We've been terrible parents, too focused on everything except what matters. We need you. More importantly, Sophia needs you." "But my daughter," Grace whispered. "Her tuition." "We'll pay it," James said. "Full scholarship. And if she wants to complete her nursing training here in New York, we'll arrange that too." Grace looked at Sophia, who was smiling at her, that worn elephant tucked under one arm. She thought of all the years of invisible labor, of being overlooked, of having her skills and intelligence dismissed because of her circumstances. She thought of her daughter, whose dreams she'd sacrificed so much to support. And she thought of this little girl who just needed someone to truly see her. "Yes," Grace said. "Yes, I'll do it." 6 months later, Grace's daughter Kioma arrived in New York to complete her nursing degree at Columbia. Sponsored by the Montgomery Foundation, Grace now lived in a renovated wing of the penthouse, officially the family's child care director, unofficially the person who'd taught the Montgomerys how to actually be parents. Sophia thrived. She still had her elephant, now carefully preserved and cherished rather than hidden. But more importantly, she had parents who'd learned to be present, to pay attention, to value what truly mattered. And every night Grace sang her to sleep with those same Igbo lullabies, in a room that finally felt like home. The unimaginable thing Grace had done wasn't magic. It was simply seeing a child who needed to be seen, and having the courage to care when it would have been easier to stay invisible. Sometimes the greatest wisdom doesn't come from degrees or wealth or status. Sometimes it comes from someone who knows what it means to love despite struggle, to work with dignity despite dismissal, and to see clearly despite being overlooked. That night, as Grace tucked Sophia in, Victoria stopped at the doorway. "Grace, I never apologized for not knowing your name for the first 3 months you worked here, for not seeing you, for not valuing you." Grace smiled. "You see me now, ma'am. That's what matters." "Not, ma'am," Victoria said quietly. "Victoria, we're family now." And in that moment, in that beautiful nursery where a worn elephant sat proudly among designer toys, they truly were.